lab is Friday. You should go through it, even if you haven't been all semester. This is the time to get that 1 point. Why not? Renata says, hey, I'm looking at you. Okay. So, even the 10% is better than the 0 for your children lab. So why not? Why not get that 10%? All right, so that's part of it. The second is we'll do the fiscal shift, which is awesome and very fun. You can play it all you want during the summertime too, like just in your spare time. Renata does. Adam does not. Anyway, so the second thing is next week we're going to talk about foreign policy. That's on Monday. Kristen is going to give the final guest lecture of the semester on foreign policy. So Kristen's going to be doing that. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to bring it back to democracy. And we're going to do a little bit of a wrap up and talk about the final exam, which in many ways is like the first exam, second exam. So one of your actually total different. So that's that, right? And then you take a final exam, you're done. I know you guys are but you can always come see me in my office. You take other classes with me. I teach lots of them, right? Eric, however, will be out.
Can I come back and take a class?
For the
Can I come back and take a class?
You can absolutely come back and take a class. You can audit when you come back, all right? So the urban politics in the fall, very exciting. All right. Let's talk about some key economic policy ideas. Guys, this stuff's actually really important. I'm going to do my absolute best to explain it to you in a way you can understand because it's not easy, right? So for me, it's something that I spend some time thinking about because it's not necessarily intuitive. So let's see how intuitive we can make it. We're going to talk about economic output, jobs and trade, inflation, taxation, spending on government services, budget deficits and debt, and then our challenges. So let's get started. First of all, in the world, some things you need to understand is the term GDP. So that means gross domestic product, right? It's the total of all goods and services produced in a nation, in one nation, in a year, right? If we talk about GDP per capita, then that's how much divided by the population, right? So the GDP is generally the way we compare ourselves to other nations. GDP per capita is maybe a slightly better measure, right? But it doesn't it also doesn't capture the whole production. And so, both are useful, okay? Trade deficit or trade balance or trade surplus. These are things whenever we are, it talks about our trade with other countries, the import-export balance. If we are importing more than we are exporting, then we have a trade deficit. Yes, we have a trade deficit. Thank you. So we have a trade deficit. If we are exporting more than we are importing, we have a trade surplus. And if it's the same, we have a balance. Right? Okay. These things are not necessarily bad or good. They are related to our economy based upon things like the strength of the US dollar. The stronger the dollar is, it's because our economy is better. But that also means we are likely to have a trade deficit because our dollar means that other goods in other places can be produced cheaper and we can buy them. Right? And so really the trade deficit is about how much we consume as compared to how much we make. All right. But it doesn't necessarily say anything bad about the status of the economy, one way or the other. Okay. All right. So let's look at the world in terms of population percentages. This is a little outdated by a couple of years. For example, just last week, what happened with India?
Most populous nation.
Most populous nation, it overtook China. But they're both about the same. Around 18 to 19% of the world live in either India, 18 to 19%, 18 to 19% live in China. That's a lot. The third most populous country in the world is us. We are, right? At 4 6.3%. So think about that, you guys. That means that more than 4 times the population of the United States lives in China. More than 4 times the population of the United States lives in India, and then we're the next biggest. It's a giant drop-off. Okay? There's a big drop-off between us. But if we look at that, we can also think about production. So this many people living in this many places, what are they producing? Well, what we can see here is kind of divided into continents. And so we have North America, Asia, we have Europe, we have South America, Australia, and then we have kind of the rest of the world. Okay? Look at the United States of America. Almost a quarter of all goods and services are produced in the United States. Our GDP is almost a quarter of everything produced in the world. We have 4% of the population. We produce a quarter of goods and services. All right? In China, which has about 18 to 19%, about 15%. About 15% production. India, if we look over here at India, about 2.8, we'll say 3%. Right? Is our economy doing okay? The answer is yes. Yeah, we're doing all right. Okay? And so here's some other examples of that. This is top 10 countries by GDP in 2020. Okay? The US, China is next, Japan, Germany, and so on. India is down here below Japan and Germany. The United Kingdom is about the same as India. All right? And these are small countries. Japan, Germany, United Kingdom. If we look at trade deficits as compared to what that means for our workforce, and this matters because a lot of times you think, hey, if we are not reducing enough to export, if we're importing more than we're exporting, then that's because we are not employing people, right? We're not making enough stuff here. And look, there's some issues in terms of manufacturing, all right? But these things aren't really connected. The trade deficit is there in blue. Our civilian employment is there in black. You can see this kind of a drop with the 2008-2009 recession, and then it goes back up. There's obviously a giant drop in 2020. It goes back up. Okay, 2020, this is unemployment. Okay, at the height in April 2020, we have 15% unemployment. We currently have 3.5% unemployment. Is that good? Yes. That's good. Okay. Why is 3.5% unemployment good? Economics, people who have taken a macroeconomics class ever. Why is that? Yes. That's right. Okay, there's a lot of job transition going on. It means that there's a healthy labor market. Okay, and also it keeps inflation reasonable. Okay, if unemployment is 0, inflation is going to go up even further. So there's a little bit of a balance there. But it also means, listen, you guys, you are in college right now. Sometimes, depends on the year, I say things like, hey, look, I'm sorry, the job market isn't great. This is the time I'm like, hey, job market's awesome. Right? Get out there and choose your job. Choose your career. Okay, you should do that anyway. But I'm telling you, we have a little bit more power right now. Okay? So it's currently 3.5%. That's great. Our unemployment is the lowest it's been since like 1968. Okay? It's really good. Okay? If we look at inflation, however, which I just mentioned, we have inflation anytime there is a recession. This is a natural thing that happens. Anytime we've been living in austerity, anytime the GDP has been lower or it's been commandeered for something like a war, right? Then afterwards, inflation goes through the roof when the economy is adjusting. So post-World War II and Great Depression, we have a massive spike in inflation. Then it goes down. And then we have World War III and it goes up, right? And then, we have an expansion in the 60s and it goes up again. And then we have the oil shocks in 1970, 1980. And I want to talk to you guys about that for a second, okay? What happens with the oil shocks is essentially this. A gallon of gas cost, anybody tell me, in 1972?
Less than $1?
You say $1, you don't say
Less,
$1?
I'd say less than $1.
Less than $1? 50 cents, all right? It was a quarter. It was a quarter. You could buy a gallon of gas for a quarter. So it did not matter. Like my first car, and it wasn't in 1972, it was later, but it was a 1955 Chevy. And it approximately got, 10 miles per gallon. My dad put black packs on it. It's ridiculously awesome. Okay. But a quarter for a gallon of gas. You guys can imagine how much you just paid the gas station last time.
$3.27 this morning.
So that would be how much more?
$3.
13 times more, right?
$3.
Okay. So it doubles with the first shock. This sends inflation skyrocketing in the U.S. It doubles to 50 cents. Well, 50 cents. I can handle 50 cents. It's fine. Right? And then we adjust. Okay, we run a figure in this energy, right? And then there's a second oil shock, and it doubles again, so it goes to $1. And it stays basically to $1 until 2004. You could buy a gallon of gas for about $1.10 until then, right? My Explorer had no problem going all over the United States. It was cheap, okay? And so we have the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, which increases oil prices. We have OPEC rising, creating a kind of an artificial raise in gas prices in 2008. And right now, we're coming off a recession, right? And also, what's going on with the price of oil? OPEC has cut production. Russia has invaded Ukraine. And so Russian gas and oil supplies are difficult, right? This is cutting off world supply. There's something I need for you guys to understand. The United States has been energy independent since 2012. Part of this is because we have decreasing demand. Because what? We're not all driving those gas guzzling 1955 Delaware Chevrolets. We're not driving my giant Explorer, right? So my current one is a hybrid, like a gas powered. When we talk about that, our demand has diminished in the United States. But global demand has, any guesses? Increased pretty dramatically, okay? And because of global trade, and now stick with me for another second, okay? Because of global trade and the fact that oil prices are set by OPEC, not by us, in terms of supply and demand, global trade, it has this impact on inflation around the world. And so if we look at inflation around the world, this is kind of at its height in 2022. Last year, we've actually dropped, I think this is 7.3%, 7.7% in the US inflation, okay? We're at about 6.3%, it's dropped. Inflation rate has dropped. But as compared to the rest of the world, we notice what kind of these pale peaks. Zimbabwe, 269%. That's the highest inflation rate. Suriname, which is number 10, 41% inflation. I want you guys to think about that, okay? There are things that go on in the world, right, that are completely out of the control of anyone, right? Except for Vladimir Putin. I do not control Vladimir Putin. Therefore, invading Ukraine is not something I can stop. It's not something the US Congress could stop. It's not something the president could stop. Okay? This has an impact. COVID, this is a pandemic that I did not create, that government did not create. Okay? But it occurred and it shut down the economy, and so we had a recession. And so we have inflationary prices afterwards. You guys see? So the question is what do we do? Well, first of all, if you look at the map, you notice the United States is actually doing a pretty good job of dealing with inflation. China certainly is doing better in 2022 because what? Any guesses? Because they still had massive shutdowns all over the country. The economy was still in recession in China in 2022. Our economy was not. Okay? It was booming right along, growing. China's economy was not, and therefore they don't have inflation to go with that. Does that make sense? So can we expect that China might have inflation as their economy perks back up? Yeah, absolutely. Okay? These are things that happen in macro and global economies. So what can we do to combat it? There are several things. One is fiscal policy, okay? And fiscal policy is the Federal Reserve Board. That's really what it is. It's really what it comes down to. We appoint people, presidents appoint people for these terms that last 10 years. And so the president who is currently in power does not have power to determine who's on the Federal Reserve Board as a whole. They have a couple of appointments each time. Okay? So the Federal Reserve Board that we are dealing with right now are mostly appointees from the time of President Obama and a little bit from President Trump. And I think Biden has appointed one new member to the Federal Reserve Board. Okay? And that's the way it goes. But because they are appointed for such long terms, that means that they are not subject to short-term pressures. Right? So the politics of dealing with, oh, this is a crisis, deal with it, they're not subject to it. Instead, they evaluate what is happening and make decisions. There are critiques of the way that they make decisions. I want that to be very clear. But the idea is they're meant to regulate the economy through fiscal policy, and in particular, what they do is they raise the interest rates. By doing this, it means there's less available money, and so people are spending less, saving more, waiting for a little bit. Okay? I have a friend right now, and she is moving to Colorado this summer, and I'm happy and sad for her, right? I'm sad because she's going to be going, but she's a little sad because she's leaving a house that has a 1.5% mortgage rate. And she's going to have to buy a house in Colorado with a 5% mortgage rate. And that sounds awful, right? My parents, when they bought a house in the 1970s, had a mortgage interest rate of something like 24%. I mean, it was ridiculous. Okay? They paid for 30 years on a $20,000 house. Ridiculous. Okay? But that is what monetary policy does. So the Fed rate has gone from practically zero to about 4.75%. People are saying, hey, you need to slow down, inflation is tampering right now, just so you know. That's something they're saying. The Fed's going, oh, we'll see. We'll see. Right? Another way to deal with it is fiscal policy. And this is much more a part of what Congress and the president do in real time. One part of fiscal policy is not real time, and that is unemployment insurance. How many of you, in your check, you look at it and there's things taken out and you go, what is that? You go, oh, it's unemployment insurance. That's what it is. It's specifically for that. If there is a recession right? Then there's unemployment insurance so that people have a place to keep from falling down. Okay, that's the whole point of it. So there are some ideas about fiscal policy, and we see these enacted by President Biden and Congress in 2021. In particular, raising the effective tax rate, raising the tax rate on corporations. They did not do carbon tax. They did not raise the capital gains tax. And in terms of spending, they put out a giant spending package, okay? Because they were also still dealing with a recession, and so that's part of it too. So the secondary effect of doing these things over here is it actually reduces yearly deficits and therefore reduces the debt, which can also have inflationary pressures on the economy. Prices can go up if the government owes too much money. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Another option is you can reduce government spending by restoring the caps on military and non-military discretionary spending. So you can say, hey, for the next 5 years, this is what you get. Live in your budget. Okay? We have not had caps on the military and discretionary spending since about 2002. So that is a way to also be more fiscally sound. Other proposals include reforming the entitlement formula of Social Security, reforming Medicare, actually just to make it more in line and more, not taking away benefits, but actually just making it more streamlined, other Medicare. Let's talk about taxation for a second. There are many forms of taxation. One is progressive tax, okay? In progressive tax, if I make more money and fall into a higher tax bracket, then a greater percentage of my income goes to taxes. From the Great Depression until 1960, those people in the top 1% in the United States paid a progressive tax rate of, any guesses?
No.
15%? Anybody else? Great Depression in 1960? 90%. 90%. In 1960, it gets reformed down to around 48% to 52% for that, those top brackets and very, very top brackets, okay? In 1981, under President Reagan, it gets reformed further down to about 38 to 36%, depending, just 38 for just a very few, and then 36%. Under George W. Bush, it gets dropped even further. Under President Trump, it gets dropped even further at that top rate, and we'll look at what the impact of that is in just a second. Proportional taxes mean that we all pay the same proportion, okay, on our income or wealth or what have you, okay? The best example of this is actually at a local level, and we're talking about property taxes, okay? So paying the same, I own this much, it's worth this much. And so a percentage of that is how much you're paying in taxes. What are property taxes paid for, by the way? Can you tell me? Yeah, schools. That's exactly what it is for. So property taxes pay for schools, a little bit for things like county roads and stuff like that, but mainly schools. Okay, and those are proportional taxes. I own a piece of property that is worth $500,000. My tax rate is exactly the same. In other words, I'm paying exactly the same percentage as someone who owns a piece of property that is worth $20,000. Okay, that's an example of a proportional tax. Regressive taxes are those taxes that are essentially the opposite of a progressive tax. So the less you make, the more of your money you pay in taxes. Can anybody give me an example of that? sales tax. Because the less money you make, the more money you have to spend to live. Okay, how many of you rent? How many of you own your property? With a couple of things. Okay. So the great thing about us property owners is not only do we not pay taxes on our mortgage, you do, renters, but number two, at the end of the year when we file our taxes, we get all that interest money back. Okay? Sales tax is a regressive tax because the less money you make, the more of your income you have to spend in order to live. The more you make, the more likely you are to invest it in things like, you know, a house. Or, I don't know, savings, a 401k, right? Those things aren't taxed. Not only that, there are other little tax benefits that go with that, right? They're pre-tax. Everything I throw into my 401k up to a certain point is not even taxed. Free money. Okay? The effective tax is the total taxes and fees that are actually paid. And so I told you about some ways that my tax rate, I may be here in the tax bracket, wherever the middle is, right? Maybe here, right here in the middle, okay? But because I also am taking some of my money off the top and just throwing it over here, right? That's not taxed. And because some of my money, a big portion of my money, is going to my mortgage, and the interest comes back to me, that tax goes away. Okay? Because of that, my tax rate is lower. Earned income tax is also something the very poorest workings get, like a bump for children. $2,000 for one, about $6,000 for two. Okay? You have to fall under a certain tax rate. So let's talk about tax revenues. This is the OECD. Again, just like with social welfare, we are looking at the OECD countries for a reason, because we are comparing what? Countries with the biggest economies, right? These are the countries that are the biggest players in the world, they're the most developed countries, and so comparing them can make sense. If we look at tax rates across these countries, the blue line is the median. Okay, so you see the blue line, that's the median. Can somebody tell me what the United States is? Above that, you have super high taxes. Fourth from the bottom, right? Remember what I told you in the very beginning. We have a population that takes up 4% of the world. We produce 24, almost a quarter of the things that are produced every year. And our tax rate among developed nations is the fourth lowest. Remember, I also told you on Monday that we have the smallest social welfare system. When people complain about taxes to you in the United States, I want you to say, they're not so bad. Okay? Because they are. And in particular, if you are the wealthiest of the wealthy, they are really nice. The effective tax rate in 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021 for the super rich, the 400 richest families, we talked about that, is lower, they paid less, a lower proportion in taxes than did the bottom 50%. Think about that. I made $10 million last year. But my tax rate was less than yours, and you made $22,000. Right? When we talk about the top 1% in income, if you look prior to the Great Depression, in the United States, we have the top 1% is holding about 40% of the wealth. Okay? In Great Britain and France, it's more Great Britain, something like 75%, 70%. In France, it's over 50%. Okay, the top 1%. Okay. Share of net wealth held by the 1%. If we look, and it's only increased since this was done in 2014, the share of the wealth held by 1% is back at pre-depression levels in the United States. Think about what that means. Think about the economy during the Great Depression. Think about the drivers of the giant recession that existed for a decade. In terms of where money is held. Now, in France and Great Britain, because they have expanded their social welfare system in such a way, the tax burden is part of that. The top 1% holds a much smaller percentage of wealth. So, where does the U.S. government actually get its money? Well, a lot of it's from income tax. As I hope I pointed out to you, that income tax comes disproportionately from people who are of a middle income than it is from other sources, not corporations, not top 10%. It also comes from things like payroll taxes. Those are specifically things like deductions for Social Security, deductions for Medicare, deductions for unemployment insurance, right? That's specifically what that is meant to cover. Okay. It also comes from things like we have corporate taxes, right? Which is a slice, which will be a bigger slice after this year. Why? What happens this year? I only told you just a little bit ago. What did Congress in 2022 and President Biden pass? Say it again? The Inflation Reduction Act, right? And part of that included a 15% minimum tax on corporations. So therefore, Amazon, which don't get me wrong, I've been a member since 2002, all right? But Amazon often in the last 20 years has paid $0 in federal taxes. That seems wrong. Okay, so 15% minimum tax. Other places we get money from are things like a little bit of estate tax. If state tax burden is really high, it has to be over $1 million before there's even any estate tax at all. Excise taxes and tariffs, very, very small. These are basically on luxury goods, okay? And, if we have certain things that sit outside of that. But another place they come from, the miscellaneous, is one of my favorite things, okay? These come from rents and royalties from things that the United States owns. What are some things the United States owns that they might make rents and royalties from? National park, absolutely. And so, for example, the federal government owns the Rocky Mountains, right? Why does the federal government own the Rocky Mountains? Can you guess it? Because nobody wanted to live there, all right? Because basically nobody claimed it, right? So nobody wanted to live there. The federal government said, hey, we should take care of this, and so we're going to own it, right? And then Aspen and several other places. Anybody go skiing? I don't usually like skiing. So Aspen said, hey, we'd like to build a resort up here at the top of this mountain. And the federal government said, cool, do it. They said, can we rent it from you? And they said, yes. You want to pay us $1 a year? And they said, yes, we do. So they make in profits every year over $1 million, and they pay $1 a year to the federal government in taxes. That's it. Oh, all the oil in the Gulf of Mexico that Exxon pulled up, they get some royalties on that. Unlike in Mexico, all the oil that is pulled out is owned by who? Anybody? The government, Pemex. And so therefore, all of those profits go to the government for what they own. Okay? In the United States, we say, hey, we own this land in Alaska. Would you like to drill on it? You can pay us $1. Okay? That's where our money comes from. So where does it go? Social Security and health and Medicare are together, make up a pretty big chunk of that, right? Over here. Income security, right? That's unemployment. That's also dealing with issues in terms of just making sure that people are in the economy. National defense is a pretty giant part of that as well. Education. And then we pay a big chunk, almost as much as we pay in education, to pay the interest on the debt that we accumulate every year. Okay? Listen to what I'm saying. We are paying almost as much in interest on our debt as we are for education. Okay? Veterans benefits, transportation are some other ones, and then other, like everything else, you know, maintaining federal parks, right? That's up to the United States. The State Department. Foreign aid, all right there, okay? That little teeny tiny bit. So the budget is a key policy tool for a number of reasons. When we think about the budget, first of all, it has to be done every year, or in the case of Texas, every 2 years, okay, at the state level. But when we talk about that, we're talking about planning. This is what we expect to take in. This is what we would like to do with that money, and so we create a budget, okay? In my last class, my student Melissa, who's right there, said, hey, so in Texas, they said all of that lottery money was going to go to education. So I don't understand why education funding is such a problem. Can anybody tell me what happened with that money? Does it go to education?
No regulations on it.
Okay, so there's not a lot of regulation on it, right? And so a lot of it's administrative costs and things like that. It's used for other purposes as well. That's true. Some of it does go to education though.
So like only like 5%.
Right, only up to a small percentage. And this is what Texas and Oklahoma, okay, Oklahoma did it too, does with that 5%. They say, oh, we expect to get 5% from people who are buying lottery tickets. Hey, who buys lottery tickets? Millionaires? Upper middle class percentages? The poor? Yes. Okay? We're going to take that money we expect to get, and what we're going to do is we're going to cut what we're taking out of general revenues for education, because we'll know that we'll get that 5%. And so they don't change education funding at all. Happens at the local level as well. When we talk about funding at the city level, a lot of times cities fund through bonds, right? Some cities do it more effectively than others. Municipalities, school board bonds, all those sort of things. And then federal and national budget is obviously what our focus is here. They are looking at what they expect to get in based upon economic performance indicators, and they make a budget. It indicates policy priorities. And one thing I want you to know here is this. If we say, after 3 strikes, you have 3 misdemeanors or 3 small level felonies, then you go to prison for life. That's the law we have passed. Okay? Then that means we also have to pay for it. Okay? So I want you guys to think about that. I want you to think about the fact that when we make decisions about laws, we also have to pay for them. Entitlement formulas mean automatic spending. turned 65, I am what? Other than older. I'm a senior citizen. But what do I get from the federal government? Social Security. I get it immediately and then right away. Does it matter if I am a billionaire? No. Does it matter if I'm a millionaire? Does it matter if I'm still working? Sometimes. So, but it is meant as a particular thing. It is meant to be, it was meant to be, as I told you guys when we talked about social welfare, a safety net. A point at which my great-grandparents Mitch in the hills of Arkansas, who have been hunter-gatherers their entire life, did not fall into abject poverty, unable to care for themselves. That's it, right? Enough to eat, enough to have shelter. That's what it's about. Okay? National budgets are obviously going to affect the economy and society, the way that we use our money. So listen to me, this is important. When you look at budget proposals by either side, Republican, Democrat, year after year, recognize that what they are funding in their budgets indicates what their preferences are, and think about what impact that is going to have on the economy and society as a whole. So, just a reminder, debt versus deficit. The debt is growing, the deficit is yearly, debt is cumulative, right? My monthly credit card bill is my monthly deficit. My credit card bill that is the total amount that at some point I will surely pay is my debt, okay? So discretionary versus mandatory spending are things like those entitlement formulas. They're also things like stuff we've already paid for. We have a 5-year contract with Lockheed to build this many airplanes, okay? That's mandatory. We've already put it into the formula, whereas discretionary means that, hey, this year we can move some money around and put more into roads and bridges or more into education. Because mandatory is growing and taking up such a large portion of the overall budget, that means that there is less and less that we can use for flexibility in policy. Tax rates versus revenue raise. You can absolutely raise revenue without raising tax rates, right? The tax rates can stay exactly where they are, and they can do things like, make us pay. Right? You can raise revenue better. The effective tax rate is different than tax rates are. So, for me, that would mean I do not get to deduct my interest that I paid on the note. Now, do I want to deduct the interest I paid on my mortgage whenever I file my taxes? Do I personally, do I want to do that? Yes, I absolutely do, right? I absolutely want that. Okay? But is it good for the country? That's a whole other question, right? Gross domestic product, just a reminder, this is the total of goods and services produced in a nation. Per capita is divided by the population. So if we look at budget deficits and the debt held by the public as a percent of GDP, and I think that we need to understand this is how we need to think about it, okay? Because if we just think about it in terms of trillions of dollars, that is not something I can even grasp in my head. Can you guys grasp a trillion in your head? A trillion of anything? No, it's impossible, okay? So don't think about it in terms of that. Think about it instead in terms of percentage of the GDP, all right? So if we look, the deficits, right, we see them in the 1940s. Why do we have such big deficits in the 1940s? World War II, we're paying for it, and we're rebuilding Europe and Japan, right, which we'll talk about on Monday, which is actually very helpful, okay? And then we see some surpluses, everything stays about the same until we get to the 1980s. What happens in the 1980s? What? The Cold War has been going on the whole time, but absolutely the Reagan rearmament, which we'll also talk about on Monday, I hope so, just this week, but the Reagan rearmament, and we end up running up massive deficits again. But if you look at them, they don't look so massive, right, as a percent of GDP. Okay. In the 1990s, with Bill Clinton, a Democrat president, and a Republican Congress, they come to a number of agreements in which they do things like raise taxes, and they also do things like cut spending. Okay, and we end up with a surplus for 3 years under Clinton. We then go to war. And deficits start to build up. We have massive recession, more deficits. We have, under Obama, these deficits start to go down. Under Trump, they start to go up again. And then we have a pandemic, and so they triple. This year's deficit is lower than last year's deficit, but it's still big. And this adds to the overall debt. So if we look at debt as a percentage of GDP, at the end of World War II, when we go into a massive economic boom, right? First of all, everybody's working, we're manufacturing things, and we're selling things to the whole war-torn world, and we're rebuilding it. Okay? During that time, we see what happens to debt. It drops away. We have taxes, they go back in, the economy is working, and it works. We see it start to go back up under Reagan. We see it go down briefly under Clinton. We see it start to skyrocket again during, we see it go up just a little bit, sorry. Under Bush, it goes up pretty heavily under Obama because of that recession. It starts to level out under Obama, and then it goes up again under Trump. Okay? When we talk about debt, at the point, as it gets closer to 100% of our GDP, this has a larger impact on our ability to make positive changes or to make policies that are beneficial for the people. Okay? So we have some problems with economic policy. Our current fiscal path is pretty unsustainable. There's no real easy solutions. I mean, look, there's not a lot of tax to cut. Okay? That's not the problem. So we have to balance spending and raise more revenue. It requires policy and formula changes. The federal government spends 21% of GDP, and we raise in revenue 17%. Right? That's a pretty big gap. So our concern is, how do we deal with this? We don't want our economy to lag. We want to be more productive. Hey, look, China's only 10% behind us, right? We need to add on to our production. Globalization and technological change mean that manufacturing jobs aren't the same as they were. We still create more cars in the United States than we did in the 1950s, but we employ about 1/10 of the workforce doing that. We also have educational challenges, which I've talked about a little bit, right? And it's making us less competitive. We have the challenge of inequality, that income inequality that I talked about. The fact that the top 1% of society own more wealth than the bottom 90%. Robert Putnam points out that one of the problems is access to college education, right? And so he says this is where the real disparity is. I showed you guys. So we need to invest in the future. Good idea. Which is your budget priority? The capital